All right, good morning. I'd like to call to order the Select Board meeting. This is December 14th, 2024 at 8:00 a.m. We are in an in-person meeting. I would like to move to enter executive session as follows, pursuant to General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21, to conduct strategy sessions in preparation for negotiations with non-union personnel, or to conduct collective bargaining sessions or contract negotiations with non-union personnel, the DPW director, and to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining or litigation if an open meeting may have detrimental effect on the bargaining or litigating position of the public body and the chair so declares. This is for police, call, fire, and DPW clerical unions. And also with us this morning, we have myself, Deirdre Perotti.
Ben Timon.
Karen Egger.
Gary Cheeseman.
And do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
And to return to open session.
And to return to open session, thank you.
Gary, yes.
Karen, yes.
Ben, yes.
Deirdre, yes.
All right. So, Rich.
Okay. All right, good morning. I'd like to move to adjourn from executive session and re-enter open session for the Select Board.
Second.
All in favor? Deirdre, yes.
Ben, yes.
Karen, yes.
Gary, yes.
And I'd like to invite the FinCom
Recording in progress.
to call to order.
And I call to order the Town of Wenham Finance Advisory Board, Saturday, December 14th, 8:35. Present, Finn Sprague.
Jared Ward. Dave Doggett. Bob Papatic.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Well, welcome everybody for our lovely Saturday morning budget hearing. I'm sure this is what everybody wanted to do on their Saturday morning, especially right before Christmas. So we thank you. I mean, I think it's a good opportunity to at least work through the budget, and this is really the first iteration of the budget. I mean, we think we've integrated a lot of feedback that we've received from both the FinCom and the Select Board into this budget. So the memo that went out this year to the department heads, in large part based on feedback from the Finance Committee to the Select Board, was that there's concerns of our free cash balance regeneration amount being slightly high, and that the board would like to see that pulled back more into the middle of the range of our stated objectives. And so because of that, we thought a way to do that was in part to have the department heads have a level funded budget, both basically adding up your expense line items and your salary line items, and any required contractual obligation, such as like an escalator and a printing leasing agreement, or steps in a collectively bargained labor agreement, would have to be balanced by the reduction in either expenditure or salary expenses to maintain the level budget. So that was an exercise that was kind of put on the department heads, and a way for us to trim the budgets back by absorbing those contractually obligated increases without increasing the budget. So over the last 3 or 4 weeks, we've met a number of times with all departments. Oh, actually, if you want to pull up the. We met a number of times with all departments. Just go to the slide number 3, and worked through their budgets with them. You'll see the budget is presented a little bit differently this year in that as you know, we're in the midst of negotiating 3 labor contracts. So we've separated all labor adjustments associated with those contracts and lumped non-union into that as well, into a separate line for tracking. We need to remember that we have to bargain in good faith, and we cannot constrain ourselves going into bargaining sessions. So this year we also talked about at one of our meetings to have an exercise of a reduction of 5% of the budgets, and what would that look like? So we did just that, and it was a good conversation. I think it needed to be done because we've always kind of just made the statement that we're pretty lean, in that further reductions beyond kind of nibbling at the edges here and there would result in reduced staffing and therefore reduced services that we could deliver to the residents. And so we went through that exercise with all departments, and the original intent was to illustrate the result of those discussions on department by department basis. But as we put the presentation together, it became clear that although just an exercise and not without the expectations of any cuts, at least this year, from my perspective, it was clear with a small organization that when you start talking about services, you're talking about, individuals specifically. So we didn't feel it to be fitting in a public meeting to be talking about what positions could be reduced in this. So with that, Jeff, Joe, and I are happy to share all that information with you offline at any time that you want to come in. We can work all that through. But the exercise would ultimately, and I think the message, and the more importantly, is that the exercise highlighted that to reduce 5%, although sounding small, would be staffing reductions and service delivery reductions. There was no way around it. So I think it was a good exercise. We've always kind of said it in the past, making that assumption, but now we've actually got into the numbers and can justify that and show what services. All right. So, but before we get into the budget itself, I kind of wanted to do just a little recap with. I want to just do the next slide. I just wanted to do a little overview. The select board this year, or last fiscal year, kind of blending together, sent to the FinCom a draft of financial policies that are industry best practices. So I thought I would go through a couple of those, although still in draft form, and the FinCom is currently reviewing that. We can kind of go over kind of where those stated policies and where we fall within them. So firstly, just to look up, hold on, go back. Just to look at revenue, our sources of revenue, just as kind of a, as a starting point. I know there's some new members here, and it's always helpful to know that our sources of revenue are not very diverse. We basically have 3 main components in our revenue sources, which are local receipts. Those would be permitting fees, such as like a building permit, conservation permit, planning, and the like. We have state aid, which is aid that comes from, just what it says, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Unrestricted, that it comes by way of, there's really 2 components. The component you're looking at here is the unrestricted government aid. The larger piece, it would be called Chapter 70, and that goes directly to the school district in this case, because it is restricted for educational purposes only, and with us being a regional district, they get the money and not us. So with that, you can see those 3 components. The very large majority is our tax revenue. This certainly is not uncommon. If you look to the right, you can see that kind of our cohort of similar communities surrounding us are all in a similar boat. You know, on one hand, it is, you know, difficult that we rely mostly on tax revenue. However, from a creditor's perspective, such as the S&P, they prefer communities with the higher reliance on tax revenue, because it is, you know, all but guaranteed revenue source. The collection rates typically in communities like this, if you want to go to the next slide, the collection rates typically in communities like this are very high, and Wenham is certainly amongst, you know, some of the best. Generally, we're always above 98% on our collection rates. So they see this as a stable, reliable income source. So that when we go out for borrowing and we're looking to issue debt, it's a safe community. We maintain our AAA rating. So you know, although it's bad because it's, you know, places additional burden on the taxpayers, but good from a debt issuing perspective. It also makes us less susceptible to economic downturns. So some of the communities that rely more heavily on state aid or local receipts, such as, you know, you look at, you know, just an example, but like the Lynn Lawrence, Lowell's, some of the bigger communities like that, if you look at their revenue structure, you know, it might be the reverse, maybe not as extreme as that, but you know, their state aid might make 60-70% of their revenue, and their you know, their tax revenue is, you know, obviously the other end of that. So you see that. Yep, go ahead.
Sorry, could you go back 2 slides to the describing the percentage sources?
Yep.
So if I use a round number of $24 million as the budget for the town, if I use $24 million as the budget for the town, and you look at this trend that has happened in the last 5 years, right? We've gone from about 13% local receipts down to 10.
Yep.
So 1% would be about $240,000, right? So this is basically saying that if that 13% had stayed constant, right, the 10% that we have at the very top there would be 13%. That'd be $750,000 of local receipts that we don't have now that we had a few years ago. So I wonder if you could comment on that. Is this a function of you know, the rates at which we charge things? Is this a
Couple things going on there. So somewhere 21 and 22, there was a relatively large, about $1 million operational override for the schools. So that would be a direct increase of about $1 million to the tax levy. So as a percentage of a whole, like, that's going to increase, you know, so the local receipts and state aid didn't go down as much as the levy went up by a special town meeting action. But there, in going through the pandemic, there was some reductions in local receipts, and state aid stayed flat. But so you're kind of seeing like I guess a double impact. So there were some reductions, and now that we're out of the pandemic, you know, this is something that Jeff and I have talked about and we brought up at the last meeting, is that, you know, we're starting to ratchet our revenue assumptions back up because the actuals that are coming in are showing to be stronger than they were through the pandemic. So we have the data now that it makes sense to ratchet it up, and part of that ties in to the free cash equation where, you know, we're budgeting, you know, let's just use this at face value, we're budgeting 10% of our, you know, the revenues for local receipts, but the reality, maybe they're coming in at an actual side at 12%. So that extra 2%, you know, in just like simple terms, is going to free cash. So it's part of why maybe our free cash is a little higher than we'd like it. So you know, the exercise to that is, remember that the two primary components of free cash are, you know, excess revenue from what's budgeted. So when your revenues come in higher than estimated, and then when you have your expenditures, when you spend less than anticipated. So we're hitting it from both sides. We're increasing our revenue estimates slightly, and we're decreasing our expenditure estimates slightly while providing level services. So the result of the two should pull us from about like the 6-something% down into the 5% range, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you. So you're saying that perhaps the 10% number will not be as low as you've got up on the screen here if you are pulling those levers that you just discussed, right?
That's correct.
Okay,
Going forward.
thanks.
So this is just up to 25, which is the year we're in now. We're budgeting for 26.
I think Finn raises an interesting point, so I'd want to just pick up on that, and it's a little bit off today's topic, but maybe just to put a pin in it as a future agenda item, which is whether or not we've undertaken any kind of an assessment of our permitting fees, for example, the types of things that generate the local receipts. How much discretion do cities and towns have under state law to set those? I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, good.
And how do when was the last time ours were raised? How do they compare with other communities? Do we take into account the fact that the average home prices in Wenham are significantly higher than neighboring communities, and therefore like a building permit fee as a percentage of the house that's going to be, the value of the house that's going to be built might be lower here than in other places, and could that justify an increase? Those sorts of questions come to mind.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So last time we looked at our permitting fees was 2016, I believe, and it is a stated goal this year to review all our permits and fees and have a presentation before the end of the fiscal year to the select board with where we fall on all the fees, from dog licenses to building permits. Every single fee, everything we charge in town to do anything will be, put out in a grid across maybe 8 to 12 different communities.
Great.
And it's the select board's discretion to set those fees. So obviously you can be as high as you want, or, competitive as you want. Like, it's some argument is, well, people will build a house. We want the revenue growth, so we want to keep our permitting fees competitive, so people come and build in Wenham. But, then the other side of that is like, well, land is so scarce. If the land is available in Wenham, like, they're going to build the house there regardless if we're the most expensive building permit fee in the Cape Ann or Essex County. But yeah, no, I agree. It's been a long time, and that's something that we're doing this year.
Great.
Yep.
Sorry, Jared Ward, FinCom. I had a question about the policy, free cash policy goal of 4 to 6. My comments previously had been that instead of a range, we should pick a number. 4 to 6 implies that there are circumstances under which you would need 6, as opposed to circumstances under which you could live with 4. And it's not clear to me that if you just throw out a range as we go through the budget process, in other words, if you end up with a final budget that says we need 6, there's got to be a reason why you need, a number of contingencies that caused you to want to keep a reserve of 6 vis-a-vis 4. My strong recommendation is that as we go through this process, we shoot to a fixed number, below which, the alarm bells go off and pencils get sharpened. But throwing out 4 to 6 and ending up with 6, which is the probability, doesn't make a lot of sense to me, when maybe if we can't identify contingencies as we go forward, we could live with 4.
Yeah, all fair points. And just to, kind of justify why we're proposing the range is, 4 to 6 free cash generation is a policy that is recommended by the Department of Revenue for the communities to adopt using the range. Free cash, as you can tell, it's as much art as it is science. So we could pick 5, but end up at 6. And we can pick 5 and end up at 4. So in the event that, we're going out for a debt issuance in any given year, and you have a stated policy that is, let's say 5, and you've justified why 5 is the right number, in S&P, and you're at 6 or 4, S&P will ask, once you have a stated goal, which they highly recommend that communities have stated financial policies, once you have a stated policy of the 5%, and you're at 6 or 4, they're going to ask why. And, is the...
Which is what I'm doing.
Yeah. So, so why did you miss your mark? So if they have knowing that you're going to fall between 4 and 6, and it's, 4 and 6 is an appropriate range, acknowledging that maybe you target 5, you target the midpoint, but knowing that it's always going to fall somewhere as plus or minus, and it shows that you're meeting your financial policy, it looks good in the eyes of the S&P as well. So, again, it's certainly a policy discussion for the FinCom and Select Board to adopt. This initial drafting was a proposal of, sort of a best practice, but, we're open to and amendable to making any changes that the board prefers, and we'll strive to continue to meet them. And these will, this type of presentation at the beginning of this meeting will, continue to evolve to match our policies, and we'll be able to build them out as we get more financial policies, so that it's an annual look as, where we're trending, are we meeting our financial policies, and kind of what's going on. But yeah, so whatever, would be looking for feedback from the FinCom, and if that's your desire, we'll certainly explore that.
Just to add on to that, so Jared and I have talked about that a little bit. One of the reasons I do advocate for a range, and I would certainly be open to the discussion of maybe the range should be tighter, maybe the range should be 4.5 to 5.5 or something, to speak to Jared's point a little. But one of the challenging parts about free cash is that we don't have complete control over it. So a lot of it is driven by DOR policy. And so an example I'll give you is that what we were allowed to cap our motor vehicle excise tax estimate at for FY25 is like $400,000 less what we actually received in FY24. And that's the DOR won't let us go beyond that number. So we've already got say a $400,000 excess of free cash created just by DOR policy. And that extends to every single revenue stream we have. They will sort of only allow us to maybe creep up 10% a year. And they hold you to not only your actual receipts, but also what your estimate was last year. So it becomes a circular problem of every year they won't let you estimate your actual receipts. And then in the following year, when you say, see, I really did make $1 million, they say, yeah, but you only estimated 600. And we say, yeah, but that's because you told us to. And so, that makes it tougher to make this a really tight number. As Steve says, like the DOR, the GFOA, some of these organizations that we follow, they advocate something in this 4 to 6 range. Actually, some of them advocate closer to 7%. But so they all tend to advocate a range, I think, for this reason. But I think certainly tightening up some of that range, is something we could discuss as well. But to Steve's point, I have had to go through the process with S&P, and when you have policies, they do make sure you adhere to them. And even, if you say, well, we're coming in at 4.4, and they say, yeah, but your target's 5, why aren't you meeting your policy? If you had that range, it alleviates that problem.
All right, so just wrapping up on free cash again, assuming this is again a draft policy, so can change, but you kind of look at the the free cash generation over the last 6 or 7 years. We're targeting, so remember, free cash is always about a year delayed. So when we say we're budgeting for FY26 right now, and we're using FY24's free cash amount is what we're waiting for certification. So kind of keep that in your mind. So next year in FY27, when we're budgeting for FY27, we'll be waiting for 2025's closing of the books to certify our free cash number. So with the things we mentioned before, with the slight increases in revenue assumptions and the decreases in expenditures, we're hoping to bring that number into the 5%, and I hate to use the word, but range. All right, so this is a nice slide to look at because last year we presented this same slide, but it was using FY24's numbers, and you can see we were just slightly over 2%. This is our stabilization funds and reserves. Our draft policy is to maintain a stabilization of not less than 5 to 7% of prior year's general operating budget. And last year, the FinCom and Select Board recommended to town meeting that we make a one-time free cash deposit into our stabilization fund, bringing us up to just below 7%. So you can see if you look at our cohort of comparable communities, the same group as we looked at for the tax levy, it kind of brings us right into the mix of that. So, certainly a good job moving in the right direction. And then our two unfunded liabilities. What are you?
Sorry, we're trying to get a microphone for the
Oh.
FinCom because there's no microphone
Gotcha.
on that side.
I just need to
You
unplug
need
that.
this?
Yeah.
Oh,
Steve, that's not connected to anything.
this?
Yeah, you just keep going. You can hand that to me.
Thank you.
All right. And then finally, before we dig right into the budget numbers, we just have our two unfunded liabilities, which are certainly two large elephants that are in the room. So our pension and our OPEB, so other post-employment benefits, are two liabilities that we have on our accounting books. And Mass General Law, we're proposing we adopt in our draft policy that requires the fully funding of our pension liability by 2035. Currently, we're at about 61%, and about 10 years ago, we were at 48%, so we're making positive movement in there. We're also, something to keep in mind, the Essex County Retirement Board, who we're a member of, will have lists of, percent funded by different communities, and those, are going to vary depending on the discount rate that they're used. So I just want to highlight that we're at using a 7% discount, which is more realistic than some of the other communities. So they may appear to be further along than Wenham does, but they might be at 8 or 8.5%, which is, a bit high in my opinion. And similarly, we're making some positive progress in our OPEB. There is no state law yet, although, however, we are anticipating one may be coming once the pension and retirement liabilities, which is something that just about every city and town in Massachusetts is struggling with, come due. They're going to be looking for those funds to be directed. The pension funds they were contributing annually be directed to the other post-employment benefits. So all of that is incorporated into our policy. In addition, to make at least a contribution in the interim, we strive to make $10,000 per year additional contribution to what was done in the prior year. So for example, last year we made a $100,000 contribution. We'll be looking to make $110,000 this year.
Question.
Yep.
Does the law that you cite there apply just to Essex County or to all the municipal pensions in the Commonwealth?
All. So we get an assessment every year from the Essex County retirement, and that assessment is tied to, basically not much different than like an amortization schedule of a mortgage. We know we need to be at a certain point at 2035, and they send us our payment that we need to keep track on
Sounds
that.
like the law still lets you to pick a discount rate.
Yeah, I mean, it does. It does. But I guess, who's right? I mean, maybe they're right. Maybe the 8.5 is going to be right. I don't know.
Well, actually, to follow up on that point, though, the law doesn't say what you can or can't do with the discount rate, but S&P does. So when I dealt with S&P 3 years ago, they were going to knock the credit rating in Essex down from a AA plus to just a AA, because at the time, Essex Regional was using a 7.5% discount rate, which they felt was out of the bandwidth that they thought was appropriate. We fought hard and said, I don't set that rate. How can you, ruin my bond rating over that? But there's definitely a general sense, S&P and other sort of rating agencies out there, that it frankly should be under 7. I think at the time S&P was targeting 6.5. You'll notice ours on the OPEB is at 6.8. But yeah, these folks that are using 8, 8.5, I mean, it's a delicate balance between trying to, minimize amortization payments that are manageable for people while still making a dent in the, the outstanding liability. And so I think, our board has done a pretty good job of managing to keep us on track while actually lowering that discount rate over the last, 4 or 5 years.
I'm sorry, last question. Does the pension fund itself set the rate, or for each? Does the manager of the fund set the rate?
The board, so the Essex Regional Retirement Board, as a policy, adopts a discount rate, and then the state PRIT program actually is who handles like 99% of the investments that they are doing, but they have to set that discount rate. So it wasn't, they had to vote and have a board meeting and vote to make that change. And just one final point on the pension, so this amount that's due each year is set, and then the way it's allocated is based on, they take all of all of us, I think there's about 46 of us in the district, they put us all together, figure out what the aggregate of all those payrolls are, and then they say your percentage of the payroll. So for us, it's 2.14% this year. Last year, it was about 2.05. So we've actually gone up about 0.1% in our share of the pie. So this year, much like the school with the apportionment issue, the budget is going up, but also our share of that budget is going up. So we get a...
The school has some employees in this municipal fund as well.
Yes, anybody who's not a teacher is in that as well. But so that's when we see our increase for this year, and we just did get our letter from them. The increase actually came in a little bit higher than we were thinking, because our share of the pool actually, increased marginally.
Very great. Any other questions on this fun topic? All right, so now what we've all been waiting for, we'll get into the budget itself. So this meeting will be a little different than in prior years. The feedback we've received is from both boards that would like to just get right into the granularities of the budget and not do, a lot of department overviews. Everyone generally kind of knows what the departments do, so what Jeff is going to do is spend a few minutes to go through the next couple slides with kind of a higher level review of budget challenges, and just kind of last year to this year comparison based on the budgets you're going to see today, and then each department will get up and review their individual budget, just briefly, kind of go maybe talk a little bit about some challenges and some of the changes that were made, and then we'll wrap it up with questions at the end, or we actually encourage questions. Just raise your hand during and ask them. So with that, I'll hand it over to Jeff.
All right, great. Thanks, Steve. So I won't belabor these points too much. That are up here as bullets, but basically, Steve covered a lot of it. Generally speaking, both boards, Finance Committee and Select Board, are looking to avoid an operational override for FY26 as a bare, baseline. But we also heard the message from both boards that, we'd also like to look at, finding ways to make reductions where we can, and particularly targeting some of these areas where if we're routinely, getting back, say $900,000 of unspent budgeted expenses, are those areas that we can tighten up. And I think what we'll see is there are some areas we can tighten up, and there are other areas that you need a little bit of that wiggle room in there, sort of for emergencies. And the point I like to make, sort of comparing a town to, maybe just a private company, private companies are much more nimble than a town. They can look at trends and see sales are dropping or whatever, and they can make changes sort of on the fly. A town sets a budget typically once a year, and then if things change and veer from that budget, you have to call another town meeting to actually make material adjustments to that budget. So, just to give you an example, this year of things that come up, in this year we have lost a transmission in a cruiser, an engine in a cruiser, a pretty significant HVAC issue at the police station, a really significant HVAC issue at the fire station. All of those are basically $100,000 worth of expenses that have creeped up in emergencies that without things like a Finance Committee reserve fund or some slack in some of the, say, like the building maintenance funds, you would, be calling a town meeting to raise $100,000 on the tax rate or use free cash or do something to address those kind of concerns. So there's definitely a balance between trying to reduce these budgets to, a more actual kind of level, but also having that flexibility to manage the town without, having to call a second or a third town meeting during the year. So with that being said, what we've committed to is, taking all these recommendations from the board seriously and working with the committees. And as Steve said, we've been meeting with boards, departments, for the last couple of weeks to start to identify some areas where we could potentially make changes and things like that. And we're committed to doing that, over the next 4 to 6 weeks as we set this budget. So what you see here today is certainly not a final number. So, please bear that in mind as we walk through it. Steve touched on the union negotiations that we're involved in now. That obviously looms over everything we do. We haven't built in any specific estimates for those contracts into departmental budgets, but we have, you'll see in a couple of slides that we've built in a conservative sort of reserve for settling those contracts. And lastly, everything we talk about today is just operating budgets. Our assumption is that, as in we've done in past years, Wenham tends to address capital with free cash, so it doesn't have a direct tax impact. Yep.
Jeff, quick question. How did you handle utilities, the gas and electric? There seems to, going through the details, there seems to be kind of an inconsistency between historical actual and the budget for 25, and then the budget just kind of rolled forward for 26.
Yeah, so that's one area where, and I think I wasn't here yet, but I think, and Steve can correct me if I'm wrong, but at one point I think we added this utility reserve under town hall, which is kind of the general management fund. We had a $100,000 reserve in there for utilities because energy costs had gone crazy, as we all know, and so rather than trying to tweak individual budgets, we had created this reserve fund. What we're going to try to do this year is to drastically reduce that reserve fund and right-size budgets throughout the actual departments. So you'll see a little bit of that today, and we're continuing to work on adjusting those accordingly. I mean, in some cases the budgets are far too high. In other cases, they're far too low across the board. So that is definitely one area I think we need to tighten up on, and I'd say that continues to be a work in process as we work through this.
You mentioned that the capital budget generally is kind of run out of the kind of free cash or the general. Is that consistent across other peer towns? Or are you thinking that?
I mean, in the ones I'm aware of, I think that's fairly consistent. I know Hamilton, actually for Hamilton, it is they've got a capital committee that, is focused on capital improvements constantly, and it's part of the operating budget, a very significant part of the operating budget. For those of you that are at the quintuple board meeting, it always strikes me that they have a huge part of their budget that's called unclassified, and underneath that falls pension and things like that. And one of the big items in there is capital as well. I sort of personally, I prefer the capital to come out of the free cash. Because I think it makes you more you have a limited pool of free cash, so it makes you more mindful of how you spend that, and makes you sort of say, okay, if we've got a pool of, let's say, $800,000 to spend, you are more likely to sort of allocate that appropriately. There is another argument that you could look at it and say, oh, I have $800,000 of free cash, what am I going to buy? But I think in most communities, usually you have well over what you have in free cash as needs. If you really think about it. And so I think it's just an easier way to do it. And I just think it's cleaner to keep the operating budget of the town separate, and then just look at that, using free cash. Not to say that things don't happen. I mean, I know a lot of the debt we carry is for little projects here and there that we've done that, either free cash was maybe not as robust, Gary might remember, in certain years, and we did have to go out to use, a debt to acquire certain things. I know even a couple years ago, I think 2 years ago, there were 2 capital items on the warrant in April, one of which was using free cash, and there was a second article that was going to use $200,000 of debt. As it turned out, free cash got certified higher, and they did use free cash for everything. But that was only probably the town meeting back in '23, so not that long ago that they had to look at using something besides free cash. There we go. Thanks. Just a couple of the big budget drivers. We presented this a few weeks ago with the school, but we've tightened it up a little bit. The biggest driver, obviously, the school has recently settled contracts, and so their budget is going up pretty significantly. With that being said, I think if you look at us comparative to some of the other communities that were on strike around us, we've probably fared pretty well overall in negotiations, but nonetheless, it still does increase the operating costs of the school, which makes up over 50% of our budget, and you'll see there that all in the operating increase is over 10.5, so it's $1.25 million right there. The pension increase that I mentioned earlier, because our share of the overall pool went up, we were hoping for about a 10-ish%. We're at about 11.15% there. So, just those 2 items, you're looking at close to $1.5 million. Health insurance, they were out here several weeks ago telling us that the Medicare plans in particular are going up quite a bit, probably 16 to 18%. The other traditional HMO PPO plans are still going to go up in that, probably 8 to 10 range. So, you're looking at a 10% increase there, which frankly would be a lot more than 116, but we did take a look at some of the historical usage of the plan, and we thought we were able to, reduce that and mute that increase, so it's only at about 116. We'll see a little bit more detail on that later. General liability insurance, everyone in the room knows who has home insurance. All things insurance are continuing to escalate at a higher rate than most things. So that's another $15,000. 10,000 extra to OPEB as part of our plan there. That is one area where we did add an extra $300,000 to OPEB last year, so we're sort of ahead of schedule, if you will. I wouldn't advocate for it, but if we were in a position where things were really, really tight, you could, cut back and stay at 100 for 1 year, using the fact that you gave a much larger gift or a donation to the fund last year. But all things considered, I'd say we stay on track. We're still, in a pretty big hole there. We're only at 15%-ish, I think, funded of that liability. And then just generally speaking, pretty much everything in the budget is level funded as best we could. And then we built in, as I mentioned, that estimate for the union contracts and salary reserve. So here is your quick, high-level look at the budget. In a way that also shows you, how that sort of translates to whether we are under the levy limit or not. And so, overall, I mean, we broke out at the top, you can see the subtotal of the town budget. So, that's everything but the schools, and then the assessor's overlay that I'll talk about in a minute. But, If you look at the chart here, we're going up a total of 441,000 roughly. The lion's share of that, 265,000, is this reserve for salary and contracts. So you take that out of the mix, and the general budget of the town itself, excluding schools, is going up about 1.52%, or about $176,000, which sort of keeps us in line with the original directive of the Finance Committee, which was to sort of come in at about a 1.27% increase, basically utilizing just new growth in local receipts. But then you add that reserve, and obviously it bumps the number up quite a bit, up to 441 there. The school obviously stands out there, the 1.2 million, and that also includes the little bit of school debt that exists currently. We're just using 3% now for Essex Tech. The caveat there is that varies on how many students we're sending into the district. So, you add another couple of students to the district, and that, can add $50,000, $60,000 to that bill pretty quickly. And unfortunately, the moving of a student from Hamilton Wenham to Essex Tech does not have the same effect on both sides of the equation. So the Hamilton Wenham budget doesn't go down a whole heck of a lot based on that one student moving, but the Essex Tech budget does. And the last piece there you'll see is assessor's overlay. Not everybody might be familiar with that term. The assessor's overlay is an amount that we set aside each year. A minimum amount is required by the state, but essentially that is the amount we have to set aside for abatements on the assessor side. So when folks file abatements and they get a reduction in their real estate taxes, there has to be a fund available to take those funds from. And so that's the assessor's overlay. We've used $200,000 for quite a few years now. It still appears to be an appropriate number based on the DOR calculations, so I don't see any reason for that to go up. But that's something we're required to do, and basically that money returns to us at some point down the road if we don't issue abatements in this particular year. There's a bit of a process with us and the DOR to get those funds to return to us, but that's just something we have to do. We've assumed, so then we have to raise, if you look at that total amount to be raised, this is the amount of money that, we're spending, essentially, $26.3 million. Then we begin to reduce that by our net state aid, which is, the state aid we receive, but then also there's assessments back to the state, that are probably, we get closer to 500 and something thousand. We give back 100,000 in assessments to net to about 400,000. Local receipts, you'll see, it's 5.67. It's a reasonably nice increase on a percentage basis. It's only $158,000, $159,000 of increased local receipts. And as I spoke to earlier, it trails what we're actually really going to collect, which, it's really a timing thing. If they let us make the local receipt number higher here, your current taxes would be lower, but you generate no free cash. So it's a question of paying less now or getting money back later. But we're sort of limited in terms of what the DOR will let us do. That growth is really driven. $158,000. The lion's share of that is we are able to go up about $72,000 in motor vehicle excise tax. We are able to increase our rent from Iron Rail to about $12,000. The water revenue that's associated with the water expenses above that, we are able to move in lockstep with the increase in expenses. That's an extra $15,000. The library, because we share that service with Hamilton and it runs through us, all the expenses show up on our budget, but we get a revenue stream back from Hamilton for their share of the services. We're able to increase that $18,000 or so. And so when you look at those net to, about 3.4 million, 3.4 million. So you have to raise $22,943,000 on the tax rate. And the calculation below just tells you, okay, we need to raise this 22.9. What are we allowed to raise? And so our levy limit is 21.3. We estimate we're going to have $150,000 of new growth, new building in the town that adds to the tax base. And then we have the debt exclusions. So, you've all probably been part of what we call a debt exclusion override vote at town meeting and at the ballot at some point over the last 5-10 years. When you vote for those things, another line item gets created here that says your levy limit, the Prop 2.5 levy limit, says you can spend the 21.4 up there. But you're also allowed to spend $940,000, $942,000 on debt that the town has approved to be in excess of the levy limit. The beauty of the debt exclusion overrides is they go away when the debt is paid off. So as Steve was alluding to earlier, when there was a vote made for an operating override to fund the school, that is a permanent increase to the tax base. So if the school suddenly became cheaper, we would still be able to spend that money and allocate it in other places. But with the debt, you don't. That once it's done, it goes away, which people tend to like more. Whether things like debt exclusion or capital exclusion overrides, because people tend to prefer increases that aren't permanently cooked into the tax rate. All that being said, we're going to spend about 22.9. We can only actually tax about 22.4, so we're about $480,000 over the levy limit right now. So as it stands, as you look at it, we are in an override position for operations. That doesn't mean we're going to have an override for a couple of reasons. One, we can continue to make reductions to the budget. We anticipate a reduction to the budget from the school that should likely wipe this out almost entirely. And then we have, other things we can do on our side. We can use free cash. We can use stabilization. We can make changes to the budget to reduce. But this is where we stand right now as it stands against the levy limit. The final point I want to make, and then we can move on to the departments. You'll notice in the prior year, that's a negative number. It's $385,000 under the levy limit. So that's what we call having excess levy capacity. We use conservative estimates when we're doing the budget around our income and things like that, and we make conservative estimates around new growth. When those things come in a little higher, and we set the tax rate, it turns out we're actually under what we could have levied as a tax. And so we came out of last year under the levy limit, and so now we're over the levy limit. So I just want to point out, so just to be transparent here, we were under by 384 last year. Now we're over by 483. So you're really like that difference. You're really looking at moving up. $800,000, let's say $840,000, increasing from one year to the next. So even though we're only $483,000 over the levy limit, that isn't how much you've increased from the prior year. So it doesn't change where we're at, but I just want folks to know the increase is really more than that 483.
Thanks, Jeff. If I just jump in, excuse me, real quick. Two points I just want to make and bring everyone's attention to: the general government, public safety, and public works up the top. It's a net reduction in spending. So I want to highlight that is, we've absorbed inflationary pressures in our expenses. We've absorbed contractual obligations and further reduced spending year over year in those categories where we have control. So I just wanted to highlight that. We talked about free cash generation and how we're going to get from the 6.5% down to the 5%. So there is reduction in spending there, in addition to the two pieces that we keep talking about, the revenues and expenses. Local receipts went up 5%. So that is an estimate that we have control over. So we've ratcheted our estimates up about 5%. So we're hoping between the two, that net reduction should bring, the free cash down. That's all.
Sorry.
Jeff, what was the actual for town budget for FY24?
Actual for
Comparable number to the 11,549.
So it was, let me just run that. It was 22,350. Oh, no, excuse me, you're looking at the 11, sorry. Did I do it minus school? 10,380 was the town part.
Could you remind us when we'll have a reliable final free cash number for FY '25?
My hope would be in the next, few weeks, certainly within the next month. The numbers are ready. They had us hold off and get the tax rate certified before we worked on free cash, but it's in much better shape than what I got here last year, and it was, we were really fighting with them over a lot of stuff. So I'm pretty confident we're right in that $2 million range.
Okay, so enough available along with some of the other factors that you mentioned to bridge that 483 gap.
Yeah, especially if the school can come in with any kind of significant reduction,
Right.
very comfortably within free cash. That being said, the issue with free cash is that when you use free cash to fill a hole, so let's say we're $300,000 short this year. So now we fund that with free cash, but we're really still short that $300,000 because we use free cash to fill it. So that $300,000 really becomes, a little more than $300,000 next year with growth and inflation. So now you've got a $300,000 hole to fill next year. So I think if we get to the point where we're looking at scenarios where we need to use free cash to avoid an operating override this particular year, I think we want to look at that almost in more of a multi-year sort of perspective, so that you can say, like, okay, let's just say after capital, whatever, we have $800,000 worth of free cash available. Or let's make it 9 to make it, nice and even. So if we've got this $300,000 problem and we look at it and say, well, we think we have enough now that if we, over the next 3 years, use, whatever, 300, 200, 100, or some version of that, it gets us through that period. So we're not just sort of like, okay, well, we throw everything in the kitchen sink at it in year 1, and then you throw your hands up and go, well, how the heck do we do year 2? But certainly, I can't think of any scenario after a school cut where we wouldn't have free cash available to fix that. But it's a good question to ask.
You indicated, if I heard you correctly, you anticipate further reductions from the school budget. What's the timing of getting the news on those?
It's certainly, less than 6 weeks. I mean, they have to set their budget, I think, by the end of January. But I mean, those discussions have started where we're all working towards, I think, an agreement to.
Yeah, I think when's the second Quint board meeting is the middle of January.
Where they would presumably inform us of what
Yeah, so
progress, if any, they've been able to make, or.
Yeah, so the school does the way they budget every year is their first iteration is every need that they've heard from their schools, their principals and things like that. They put it all together, so it's almost I don't want to say worst case scenario, but it's probably as high as it's going to be. And then they go,
which is what this number is?
Which is what that number is. So that is what has been presented to the school committee, and we've been informed of. So we don't have anything else to go on, but we know that they are working to reduce that. They're sensitive to both Hamilton and Wenham's restriction in their ability to raise revenue. All parties are on the same page as wanting to avoid an override of any kind at all costs. So we're expecting that number to come down substantially at their second iteration. But we don't want to speculate, so that's why we're sticking with what we know, what's been stated in public meeting.
Okay, thanks.
And sorry, just to ask a kind of ignorant question. The bottom line, the total levy limit debt exclusions. So this essentially implies, as things stand right now, the tax rate is going to go up by 3.13% if all else is the same. You can get away with it because you were under the 2.5 number, but that's kind of where it looked like essentially.
Yeah, and that, I would just say that the levy limit is increasing 3.13% year over year in that scenario. but that's not necessarily the tax increase. The tax increase is a different component. And again, because, just looking at it, that 21.778, we didn't actually hit that number. So even though the increase in the levy limit is only 3%, 3.13%, we didn't use all of the number from last year. So that means, the real increase is a bigger number. That was, I guess, the point I was trying to make a little earlier, is it's not just the 3.13%, it's the whatever, whatever the 384,973 adds to that mix. As we get closer to sort of, finalizing the budget and things, we'll be showing, this will have, what the tax impact is, the average home, median home, that type of thing, because I think that's important for people to see. But yeah, it would certainly be more than the 3.3. It's more likely to be, closer to the 7.24 number above, which is the actual increase in what was taxed.
Yeah. And something to remember is that it would only be that much if there was an operational override, because right now we can't raise this entire amount. So the reality and the target is to reduce this number by about $500,000. And, so as a percentage, that's going to cut about a third off that 7.24%. There's a few other pieces that will go over, net tax impact, but that's pretty close.
So you'd have a 5%.
Yeah, roughly. All right.
Now, are we going to move to public safety first?
Yeah, why don't we we'll do police, fire, and anybody else have to go to the REITs Across America early for setup? I know public safety.
I do.
Oh, we don't. Doesn't matter.
I don't
I'm just
count.
kidding. You got to stay for the whole
Duly
thing.
noted.
No, just kidding. No, but they have to set up. But we want to. Everybody's going to be out of here in time for the REITs Across America to attend.
Okay.
But I know public safety has to get over there a couple hours in advance for setup. So why don't we start with police and fire?
We need a binder.
Is he waiting for Steve?
Oh, yeah, Chief, you can go. Yep, you're all set.
Oh, okay. I don't know if you want me to just start by generically going over
Sure.
kind of a
Like
state of
high
the
level.
state.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, that's fine. I first want to just obviously thank Steve and Jeff and you, Joe, for taking the time when we met last week and just for the back and forth dialogue. I know a lot of the department heads probably echo the same feeling, that it was an atmosphere that was conducive to a productive discussions, so that made it a heck of a lot easier as we dredge through this. And then, obviously, I want to take note to thank Deputy Chief Lucantoni and Executive Assistant Jackson for helping us kind of forensically look at the details of where we're at and where we need to be. And the teamwork at my place and in town is beyond words to describe how much it makes things better. The biggest thing that we were looking by way of our discussion was to take a look at, obviously, a few different areas, the expense options as far as abilities to trim some areas, and I can certainly discuss that. As we were looking at each line, some of the areas that we were hoping and that we had a little wiggle room to shave some of the money off was Pleasant Pond. We took a look at our supplies, and what allowed us to shave a little money there for the expense line is that when we transitioned over from lifeguards and gatekeepers to all gatekeepers, that allows us a little wiggle room relative to the need for uniforms, for CPR certifications, for the other certifications that are required that would have been and were in the past relative to the lifeguards, we can move away from that, and that need isn't as apparent. And so it allows us to take a look, and we estimated about $1,000 can come out of that line, and I think we'll be okay. Relative, and that's line 5310 for the Pleasant Pond supplies. 5580, our overall uniform line in expenses. Right now, current to the current collective bargaining agreement in place, has a mandated uniform allowance across the board. Also contractually for myself and the deputy that mandates an amount per full-time officer. We also have an estimated amount relative to the each individual reserve officer that we've had in place for quite some time. However, taking a look since I've been in place, when I first started, we had 16 reserves. We're down to 8. So what we were able to do is take another look into that and shave a couple $1,000s out of that line because of the smaller reserve force. But we did have to leave a little bit of a buffer and an overage in place because if an officer damages a uniform in the course of his or her duties, it's in place to the collective bargaining agreement that it wouldn't then come out of their uniform line. So if they rip their pants, you know, if they're chasing a bad guy and they fall and rip their pants, that wouldn't come out of their individual line. We would then have to bring that out of the uniform line in general. So that's why a little bit of a buffer needs to remain in place for the possible needs to pull from that line, but we were able to still estimate to take several $1,000s out of that line and still be okay to shave some more costs. We took another look at the miscellaneous line 5581. That's another $500. That looking at past usage and possible future usage, we could shave that off as well and still operate functionally and be okay. Those are the expenses in areas that we look to try to make some cuts, and I think we're able to definitely do that. Relative to the salaries, we're kind of in a funky place right now as we have active negotiations going on. The current collective bargaining agreement is in place till June 30th of this year. So what we were able to do relative to the salaries is have an estimated thought in place for where the agreement would end up. We looked at a few different areas to try to make some cuts, and it's really hard to do that with kind of the unknown that currently exists. If we were able to move some of the reserve officer money, the problem that exists with that, based on the mathematical formulas that we put in place, is if those reserves aren't working at their flat, base pay rate, that then becomes time that has to be filled by a full-time officer at an overtime time and a half rate. So you're looking at about a $38 an hour difference between the average reserve officer rate and the average time and a half rate for one of our full-time officers. So essentially, you're robbing Peter to pay Paul if we were to shave some of that reserve money off, which was one of the areas that we spoke about. We also then spoke about another position in place relative to our inventory control specialist, and he's an invaluable part of the current department that we have in place. He works 16 hours a week, and the duties and responsibilities beyond what his job description lays out are a huge part of the day-to-day operations of the police department. So we're hoping to maintain that. So I definitely don't recommend moving forward with any changes there. The other, there's some minor contractual step obligations relative to the current police officers that are in place by way of with the current CBA that's in place, collective bargaining agreement in place. There are certain delineated steps that will trigger minor raises, whether a contract is agreed upon in principle or in general before July 1. So either way, those steps would trigger minor changes. And then also, there are some stipends in place and some other nominal costs that are relative to the current agreement in place, whether or not, if and when the agreement takes place. So we average those out. But the biggest change we were able to make, and the removal you'll see here, is the bridge reserve salaries. So that if some of the folks that have been in town or on the board in the past will remember that we had a state mandated, an unfunded mandate at the time relative to the training requirements for part-time police officers to maintain their certification in the state. That was over a 3-year period that we had to find the funds available to do that. Over the last 3 years, the first year we had to do some dancing to find that money. The second 2 years we were able to budget it in, which this past year was our final year that we had to budget it in for the proposed 3 officers that were going to be required to get those additional training hours in place. This year, moving forward, the Bridge Academy expired, if you will, on June 30th. So anyone that hadn't obtained at any department in the state, any part-time officer that did not obtain that additional training that was required by that June 30th deadline would in turn have not been able to maintain their certification. So that is moot at this point. So that 25,591 can come out, which is a big plus, because it'll allow us that buffer to trim what we were looking to do without making any huge day-to-day positional and operational changes to the agency. So that's kind of a rough state of the state. I'd be happy to answer any questions or dive a little deeper. Yes, sir.
Yes, just to be educated, I'm looking at all the different patrol increases or decreases. Why do some go up a lot and some go down a lot? It strikes me if they have the same job description, wouldn't they all be going up by a certain negotiated amount?
So yes and no. So what happened was with the last collective bargaining agreement that was agreed upon, it created a table of steps for each officer, and that's specific to time on the job. So whatever step you're at, and some of the steps will change over the first, I believe it's 1 to 5 years, they change annually. Then there's a period of 5 to 10, and I want to say 10 to 15. So you could get stuck in that step for a longer period of time, so there wouldn't be any movement. So some of the officers may not be facing that change to another step because they're in that period of time on the job that won't trigger that, whereas other officers over the first few years, if they came in brand new, they're going to see those steps over the first few years. But if an officer came in with, say, 10 years experience, he or she from 10 to 15 wouldn't have any changes. And it also ties into their time off. They made it parallel with the steps relative to your vacation time and your additional contractual salary raises. So that's probably why, or that's definitely why you see some changes more than others.
Yeah. Go good.
And Jared, and one of the things is we've listed positions there. We're obviously not listing actual people. So I think sort of in the patrol area, you'll see some ups and some downs where the person has actually changed. So maybe you've gone, you're actually seeing a reduction because let's just say patrolman 3 was, you had someone who was a step 4 and then you hire a step 1, and then up in the sergeant, there's a pretty large increase there. But I think that would be more as the steps move, as the chief says, the early years, it's like almost a step every year. And then I think it goes to like 5-year increments in between steps. So obviously when you go up a step and it's a 5-year increment, it's a nicer bump at that point. So what you're seeing is a sergeant who probably, went from whatever, a step 8 to a 9 or a 7 to an 8 or something like that. That takes a longer to get there, but when you get there, it's a larger number. But some of this might look funky from a math standpoint because you're it's not Jim Smith, in both columns. It's Jim Smith in year 1 and Bob Jones in year 2. So there's, we're trying to give good detail, but also not, put people right out there at front and center. But generally speaking, that's the idea there.
Yeah. Presumably, the overtime over the year would be allocated to different officers who elected or were required to utilize that.
Yeah, And we have an average number for all our full-time officers, what the average overtime rate is. We calculated that, and I have that. And that's the only other thing that may change depending on the agreed-upon wage scale adjustments or step raises or whatever, that may trigger that overtime line change nominally relative to that general rate changing. So, I have an average overtime rate now of $66 an hour, but if they, whatever's agreed upon, that could change a little bit to cover that.
And does the overtime usage, is it kind of consistent, every officer is roughly 10% of that number, or?
So, no, yes and no. So year to year is different too, and certain circumstances can trigger that. We have an officer out now on extended military leave, so that creates more vacancies. And a lot of it is how it's written up too, of what is required to be a full-time officer overtime as opposed to what we're able to fill with a part-time officer vacancy. And some of that I have control over, and some through the CBA I really don't. And then it's also based on, we have a system in place that's hours-based to try to keep it fair and equitable to the overtime usage. So if two officers put in for the same overtime shift and they put a bid in, the one with less hours will get awarded that. And so then it could change. You could have a entry-level patrol officer overtime rate, which is a heck of a lot different than a top step sergeant overtime rate. So that can factor it as well.
All right.
Oh, Bob first.
On the expense slide,
Yes, sir.
I was looking at the actuals for '23 and '24, compared them to the budget for '25, which is being rolled over for '26. The two items stood out. One was electricity and the other was training. The question is the experience for 2025, which we're only partly into now, consistent with the 2025 budget, or is there something that could suggest a change when we do the '26 budget?
So the training, the biggest difference with I'll speak to that first, is through the post. The post is the governing authority which was created a few years ago relative to all police officers in the state of Massachusetts. In that implementation of the new post requirement, a cross-reference with we're accredited through the state of Massachusetts, there's a whole bunch of additional training requirements that we have to adhere to on an annual basis to maintain all of our officer certifications and to maintain our accreditation. So that's triggered the need for the training, without a doubt. That's a huge difference there, why that's required, and we have very little wiggle room with that. And I'm sorry, the other one was electricity?
Chief, I can take that one.
Yeah.
So the electricity, Bob, you'll notice the electricity was $120 in FY23. Our meter was broken, and so we were getting a bare minimum $10 a month charge.
Yep.
And it was discovered in earlier this year, probably January or February of this year, and they've begun billing us again. And since then, obviously electric rates continue to rise. But that's what accounts for that very drastic increase in electrical charges there. So the 16 is probably, it could actually be a little light when all is said and done, because that 9,216 actual in FY24 is honestly probably just not even half. That's probably a good number, and for the most part, they've written off a good chunk of it. It's just sort of a windfall for the town of Wenham there.
Oh, you can go ahead.
Thank you. For Wenham and recruitment services from fiscal year '23, does that imply you haven't had any vacancies that need to be filled for the last couple of years and don't expect it, or how should I think about that?
No, we've had vacancies annually, and I'm trying to look back on why that's. I have a proposal for capital relative to a promotional process, and I can't speak to
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be the 11,000 there on the bottom for we're going to put to capital.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the chief can probably speak to it better, but not all searches are the same. So like we're potentially looking at a sergeant search now, which is more involved than a patrolman search or whatever. So, this upcoming one will be a capital addition when we do the budget to ask for 11,000.
Yeah, and it's best practices in a lot of area agencies. Most outsource any promotional processes now, and it has to be validated and standardized because of accreditation as well. And we have an outside entity that comes in. We did it last time as well, that proctors and does the written examination along with in a full-day assessment center, and then objectively identifies the best candidates for us to move forward with.
Question, can you go back to the personnel slide, I guess the next one? Chief, can you just touch on briefly the recommendation to not fill the detective position and to add a 7th patrol officer? So
that was more of a shell game. We're definitely want to fill the detective position. So it's not its own entity. The detective position is in the current CBA. It's a patrol officer or a sergeant, for that matter, depending on how we fill it, that then gets an incentive to work in the detective capacity. So they just moved it. It's not its own identified position yet. I think we can get there, and I'd like to get there, but right now it's a 10% differential for whatever officer is working in that capacity.
And there was such an officer in FY25?
Yes, there currently is now. Sergeant David Marsh is acting as our detective now.
Okay.
They're currently, they assist a lot. They assist the deputy with court. Not to mention Dave Marsh has done a phenomenal job with a lot of different duties and responsibilities that position gets thrown on him.
So it's possible that one of the 7 patrol officers might get promoted, for lack of a better description, to the detective
100%.
position? Yeah. Okay.
I have a quick question regarding meals and travel. Is that in conjunction with the trainings and education? Are they traveling to the trainings? Is that what that is covered?
So, yeah,
or is it
depending-
a separate?
No, they kind of tie in together, because some of the training, if it's out of state or, depending on the type of training that exists, we pull from that line. They can put in, if a cruiser's not available, an officer can put in for mileage. If the cruisers are tied up for responsibilities in town, or if it's a scenario, usually overnight training, they can also put in for meal reimbursement, which occasionally happens, and it would get pulled from that line as well.
So the training and education does not encompass all expenses to and from the training?
And we could talk about, Jeff and I, we've had discussions about it in the past of kind of condensing some of the lines, and I know in different municipalities, to your point, Selectman, that happens, so it can be pulled or morphed together. I don't know. I mean.
Yeah. I mean, I would view the training and education as more, unlike in my office where I might go to UMass for a week and stay out there. Your trainings tend to be more, you bring a firearms instructor in for the day and you spend $1,500 to bring the person in and train for the day. That would fall under training and education. Yep. Perhaps when you do that, you may sort of bring in pizza or something like that, and maybe the pizza falls under meals and travel, and the cost of the instructor goes to training and education. We tend to, in the finance department, or maybe like Steve, we tend to go away to trainings individually, but I think in your department it's a far better process, to bring someone in, everybody gets the same training at the same time, it's more cost effective, it's more, you get a better bang for your buck, and you ensure everybody's getting the same training, and whatever. And so I think it sort of makes sense to keep them separate, because there are, like, as a chief, you might go to a conference for a week, more like, maybe Steve or I would do, and that would fall under, you'd have a lot of meals and travel there. That would, that kind of thing that falls there.
We just did that before, we had our department meeting a couple weeks ago, so it was kind of one-stop shop, and we had the whole department there, and we had a woman from Hawk come in that taught all the officers about, domestic violence and the updated laws and how we work in Essex County to use their resources effectively, and then we were able to feed the officers during that training, and it was a good event. It was very productive. So that's exactly to your point, Jeff.
Maybe one more question for me on communication services and telephone. If I remember right from, and just correct me, this may just be some ignorance. Last town meeting, the fire department and police department asked for $250,000 for walkie-talkies or some.
Mhm.
So does that, and I see like a pretty large jump like telephone costs from 23 to 24, then it seems it's more expensive.
I know.
Like, does that factor in, or is that something separate? Like,
Well, I know we added to that line because the beach needed a phone line, so I don't know if that's the same line that's pulled from. All our, the cell phones for myself and the deputy and the detective, and then each cruiser have cell phones. I can't think of,
I think the walkie-talkies were at fire department.
yeah, that was a capital.
It was both.
That was an immediate need, yeah.
Yeah, that was a
But I think
Those
capital.
are for the
Fine.
devices,
Yeah.
the difference is those are for the device, the capital request was devices themselves.
Yeah.
These are the like service and licensing agreements that are annually reoccurring
okay.
for those devices, cell phones, and also our hard lines
And our
into the building.
laptops and our cruisers require that as well.
And before we move on to that, thank you, Chief. And before we move on, if you just could pull the salaries up, I just want to make sure everybody's on the same page. I know we've kind of belabored this slide, but, so, we talked, it was brought up, but, you know, if one person goes up, why is there different increases? And it was explained very well about, you know, the step increases and depending on how long you've been with the town and your seniority. But I want to highlight, this is one of the contracts that we're currently negotiating. So the cost of living adjustment is part of the negotiations, and that's the piece that would be applied equally amongst all the participants. So you have two components. You have essentially your longevity increase for your time with the department. That's contractually obligated, and regardless if you have a contract in effect or not, union members benefit from the benefits of the previously negotiated contract, even if it's expired. So in this extent is step increases, so that's why they're reflected here. And we made the adjustments in other areas downwards to absorb those without, you see the negative 1.44%. So we've absorbed those increases to maintain the level fund request coming from the FinCom and Select Board. But the cost of living adjustment is what we're negotiating now, and we have that side sort of bucket of money that we're anticipating will cover that, and it's already budgeted for. But just so, you know, these will change, and that's how it's going to change, and we already have the money that will fund that set aside and is reflected in the totals here. I just didn't want any questions that come up later.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Chief.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Chief.
I'm not gonna be that long, so.
30 seconds, let's go.
No, it's gonna be pretty quick. So on salaries, everything pretty much stayed the same except for the additional coverage. And that was, we added 11,700 to the coverage line item. It was 28,371.94, and we added the 11,700, which is now a total of 40,071. So this was an operational need. We've been having problems with getting people to respond. And it kind of helps guarantee that 2 firefighters respond to after-hour calls
from 1,700 to 700, and 24 hours each on Saturday and Sunday. This amount would compensate for one person to take a coverage along with the assigned officer in charge for 1,700 to 700 hours, which is a 14-hour shift, and that would give them a $25 stipend for 14 hours to be around. And a 24-hour shift the firefighter would receive $50. And that would help ensure just a bare minimum to get the ambulance out the door, because that is one of the #1 revenue generators in the town. So it's a very minor amount to guarantee someone around. Other than that, salaries, nothing else changed.
And Chief, just to put context to that revenue, so ambulance revenue, actual revenue in FY24 is $183,000. So just so people understand the context of having that service, having that coverage, there is a direct correlation to revenue, received by the town.
Oh, yeah. And we're already up 180 calls this year. So it just keeps, it keeps compounding and compounding.
Where would that 183 end up? Is that in the local receipts?
That's in our local receipts, yeah. And another one that's probably, because we haven't been doing ambulance service revenue for too long, it's another example of probably we went from a low number, we've moved up to a higher number, and the DOR is kind of ratcheting us down on that. So that's an area where we're probably under reporting based on our estimates. We'll also probably talk about it town meeting this year, taking those funds and putting them into something called a revolving fund. What other communities tend to do is set that money into a revolving fund and stockpile money to buy the next ambulance. Basically, you need another ambulance every probably 5 years, and most communities tend to get on a schedule where you've got an old ambulance and you can use for a couple more years when you get the new ambulance, so you're running 2 ambulances.
Yes.
And you can generate more revenue.
I think that's on the agenda for 2 years from now, I believe. So that one would go into reserve. Hopefully we could find a spot to store it, hopefully here, and then we would buy a new one, because if we go to a motor vehicle accident, there's always more than one patient. So we lose on that patient when we could transport 2 people instead of 1. So it would help us considerably.
Yeah. And I don't know that everybody really understands, but transporting is what generates revenue for the town. So towns have, and Hamilton might be a good example, Hamilton, say, has EMTs on staff, but because they don't have their own ambulance service, they don't transport the patient, and therefore they don't actually get the revenue. But their actual cost for having that patient probably isn't much lower than it is for us, but we, by virtue of transporting the patient, actually create revenue. Yeah. So it's something for folks to be mindful of when we have. There's not many things in the budget that the increase in cost actually correlates directly to an increase in revenue, but this would be one of them.
And also motor vehicle accidents we bill for, so that's almost another $50,000. And Gordon College, they pay dollar for dollar. So whatever we send out for manpower, trucks, we bill them and they reimburse us, which is great. Now on the expense side, that went up 1.06%, and that was due to all the new defibrillators that you see in all the town buildings. And there's a $2,000 expense yearly for replacement pads and batteries for each one. And down the road, we're gonna have to have a discussion about putting full-time on. At least 2 people on 24 hours a day. And that can be done through a federal grant. The first year, if we were to get the grant, ultimately I would like to put on 6 full-time firefighters. And the first year they pay everything 100%. Second year is 50%. Third year is a quarter. And after the third year, we have to retain them for a minimum of 5 years. but at least it gives you starts building out where we can prepare over 3 years. And you guarantee 2 people on at that point, 24 hours. You don't have to worry. Unfortunately, not this Thanksgiving, but the Thanksgiving before, I was the officer in charge, and I was the only person that showed up to a medical. I had to call for another ambulance. Annette, got any other questions?
Chief, as somebody who has unfortunately had to use your ambulatory services quite often in the middle of the night from a family perspective, there is nothing more comforting in that exact moment
Yes.
to have a sick child or a husband at that point, to have someone in the community that you know and you trust and you see on a regular basis. So I fully understand and support that in any aspect that we can.
Thank you. And for the $11,700 for $25 on weekdays and $50 on the weekend is pretty short change.
And having the part-time EMT on a regular basis, the EMT shows up in regular clothes. At one
Yes.
point, there was
Yes.
one who showed up in a full painting outfit. So
Yes.
it was a slight concern from the Anger
Oh, yes.
household of whether or not they worked for you.
Oh, yes.
But it's nothing more comforting than having them.
Yeah,
So, thank you.
thank you. Anything else?
Do the firefighters receive EMT training as well, or are they strictly fire prevention and?
Oh, no, they get training. We offer training in-house. A lot of them take it outside, but we always offer credits in-house. Even during training, you can get credits. So we try and incorporate medical with fire plans during training, and which will give them like 3 hours credit.
And then for the firefighters, does the state have a certification process as to certain things that each firefighter has to go through in terms of standardized training?
Oh, yeah, every EMT, yes. Every 2 years, you have to recertify.
But also for the firefighters?
No, well,
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Firefighter 1, 2, they go through at the Mass Fire Academy.
Okay.
And they usually start that at the beginning of their career.
yes. And then there's always trainings offered throughout the rest of their career.
Because Jeff, is it all firefighters have first responder training, then there's EMTs, and then the final level is like a paramedic, which is we're an EMT force.
So you have to be a first responder even to go to the fire academy.
Yes.
You can't get into there without it. And you can still be a first responder with us, but within the 2-year period, they have to become an EMT.
Yeah. That's what we make mandatory. There's no point in having someone sitting here and they can't drive the ambulance out the door.
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah, I just feel like a lot of people don't know like the sort of like the difference between, first responder all the way up to paramedic and whatever, but.
And being a taxpayer, I don't want to see that happen.
First responder is a classification under the training regimen?
So there's
Okay.
first responder, there's EMT basic, EMT advanced, and EMT paramedic level.
Yeah.
So you're always gonna start with your first responder level, which is your very basic one.
And anybody who comes in can go up that career path with Wenham if they so desire?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And that's the problem. We lose a lot of people to, I just lost 2 firefighters, one to Exeter, New Hampshire, and one to Devons. But they're allowing them to stay on our department. They haven't required them to move out of town yet. Which is good for me, because they work at 24 off, 24 on, 5 days off. Yeah, so it works out great for me.
And how large is the on-call staff you have?
28.
And do they all respond every call, or like?
No, that's the problem. You don't have to come. So,
It's purely optional, really.
yeah, Friday nights, Saturdays are tough. Like, I'm the OAC today. I've already worked my 40 during the week, but I don't ask you as a call firefighter to take a weekend if I don't. So I start my Monday off, 64 hours. Not counting any other calls. But that's how it works. And it works great right now, so. Any other questions?
No, it's good. Thanks, Chief.
All right.
Thank you, guys.
I'm gonna get going for the,
All right, sounds good.
thank you.
Do you want to start back at the beginning of like
No, we'll
general
just
town
do-
government, or?
No, I think we'll do, we'll stick with public safety, do permitting. Rich will do permitting next. Rich Maloney. Everyone's favorite zoning official.
Morning, everybody.
Morning, Rich.
It's pretty cut and dried. Looks like last year. Nothing's really changed. Probably the biggest change is we changed our online permitting July 1st. And same program we use over in Hamilton, we had some issues with the third-party vendor for taking money, so we carried a $3,000. The vendor that comes with the company was a no cost. We've had a lot of problems with them over there, so we changed vendors and it cost us a couple $1,000s. We haven't had any issues with the third-party vendor that comes with the company, so we eliminated that $3,000 placeholder we had. So that's the only change in the budget.
And just to remind everyone that this is a shared service with Hamilton, so Rich covers both Hamilton and Wenham, and this is one of the shared services that works really, really well. Rich runs a very tight ship, and everything's going great here.
Yeah, our revenues through November, we've taken in about $40,000 in permit fees. So we project that out, we're guessing somewhere between 80 and 100,000. So we'll cover our budget.
Yeah, generally, this department's self-supporting, and even if anything, profit generating.
Morning. We don't anticipate any issues with the new website and the interface between that and the new permitting system, I take it?
None at all.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Easy one.
Thanks, Rich.
Thanks, Rich.
That's it?
Enjoy the rest of
Great.
the day.
Everybody have a great
Still
day.
get a 9.
Land use.
And so now,
Land use
yeah,
and
I
then
do
tree
land use and
warden.
tree warden. Kate Mallory, come on down.
Everybody. Hi, my name is Kate Mallory. I'm the land use director. Nice to meet you guys. So we were able to level fund the budget, just moving a couple of line items around. For the first line with the contract services, you can see that that is just some contracts we have with ArcGIS. So the Esri contract that we need in the land use department, and Sign Now, which is what we do to sign off on our permits. So we have electronic signatures with that.
Kate, can you hold on for 1 second? Where
Yeah.
is this?
Yeah, I think, do you want to start with tree warden? I was calling you up because tree warden was the last of the, or I guess he's going to pull it back. What page is land use?
30, land use is 25, tree
Okay.
warden is 36.
Yeah, but yeah, if you want, I think people were looking at tree warden as like the
Oh,
next of the
sure,
thing,
yeah.
sorry.
Does everybody have the tree warden one now? Okay, great. So we're just requesting to level fund this budget. First of all, the salaries is for our actual tree warden, so he gets a stipend. So we'd like to just level fund that. For the expenses, the $200 is usually just for miscellaneous expenses like gator bags for trees that we plant. The contract services is taking down trees. So in 2018, we have a tree report that we had done, and it shows that there are a lot of sick trees in town. So last year, we really started this initiative to really take care of those dangerous trees and then also to plant new trees. And so that's what the contract services are for, taking down trees. We're on track to take down around 25 to 30 trees this year. And the way the tree warden goes about that is he looks at the trees that are the most diseased, the most dangerous if they come down. for that line, and also resident requests as well. And for the tree planting, this is, to me, the most exciting part is we're planting about 12 really good trees each year. We've done 6 already so far. And we have the Arbor Day celebration. We started an apple orchard in Reynolds Farm, so that was wonderful. This year, we'll probably use the funds for the celebration in conjunction with opening up the new West Wenham Park that we have. So we're going to hopefully do a community event with that. So that's it with the tree warden. Any questions?
Land use?
Do you have a particular firm that you contract with, or do you bid out on a job-by-job basis?
Yep, it depends each year, kind of what the plan looks like. Iron Tree has really helped us out a lot. We're looking at different tree companies so we can, instead of piecemealing one tree at a time, that costs more money. If we can get a company to come in and to do them all at once, that would be a little bit cheaper. So we're looking at different options now.
Jump to number 25, this 25th slide. Apologize for jumping around here, but it's already 10:20, and we want to make, hit the exciting departments. Make sure they're hit by 11:30 so everybody can get to the REITs across America.
Great.
I don't think anyone really cares about the finance department. So.
Not even in my house.
So for land use, I actually skipped over the salary piece. So the salary is for myself, and we have a part-time planner in the office who is wonderful. So it's a 2-person office, and so most of our budget is salary, and then we have, we were able to level fund this budget underneath. So like I said, with contract services, those are strictly contracts that we need, a land use department needs to run. Postage, we mail out abutters notifications and certified mailings. So we were able to look at what we had used in years past and truncated that down. Office supplies, really, it's just folders and labels and stuff like that. So it's $200. And so the big ones, the meals and travels and the dues and subscriptions and the training and education, those are when you work in conservation and planning, you have certain certifications that you have and you keep up. So one of the major things that we have is we travel each year to the SNEPA conference, which is the planning conference in southern New England. And so that would be hotel for 2 nights. So you're talking travel there for myself and our other planner, and the cost of the tickets. And so basically what those trainings do is they keep up our certifications and also help with our continuing education. We had a great training this year in Springfield, Massachusetts. It was really educational, and we've brought some of those things back with us. So that's great. And then for the advertising, we turned down the training and education a little bit to make sure that we had enough money for miscellaneous advertising. So legally, we have to advertise zoning changes, and with the master plan implementation, it looks like we will be doing some zoning changes within the next few years. So we wanted to make sure that we padded that line a little bit as the Salem News. It costs about $700 each time, $600, $700 each time you put in an ad for those zoning changes. Any questions? Okay. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you. We do assessors.
Where are you going?
Assessors, page 17.
Yeah, I realize the pages aren't numbered. Unfortunately, they're digitally numbered.
Oh, assessors.
No one likes to follow Kate Mallory. I'm Teresa Fontaine, interim principal assessor. Brief history of the changes in the department. Probably 3-4 years ago, well, probably about 3 years ago, they went from part-time assessor and part-time office clerk to a shared assessor with Hamilton Wenham and full-time assistant assessor myself. Recently, Todd Laramie has left to take the assessing position in Marblehead, so we are in transition at this point. But you will notice that in the salaries and wages, we do have a new administrative assistant, which hopefully will be ratified soon. And that number is probably going to be much lower. I think that's based on the difference between Todd's salary, the shared position, the Wenham share, and at about 19 hours, maybe even 16, depending on what we feel the office needs, and an hourly rate, it will probably be much lower than that. So there will be some trimming there likely. Contractual services, we have Patriot Properties who assists us with our software program, and also Cartographics that does our assessors maps and the online GIS system. Last year, the assessing budget took on the entire Cartographics, which was shared with land use before. So, we absorbed that cost last year. It makes sense to have it all in one place. Training and education, same as everyone else. We keep up our certifications. I have my MAA, Massachusetts Accredited Assessor, and would encourage the new administrative assistant to take courses and ultimately go for an MAA as well. Postage, we have a lot of mailings. We mail out the forms of lists for businesses, income and expense forms for commercial properties. We, as a courtesy, mail out exemption applications to seniors, veterans, and blind, anyone who received an exemption in the prior year. They don't always remember that they have to apply every year, so as a courtesy, we mail those out to them and follow up. And then there are notifications of cyclical inspections and things of that nature. We like to send out a postcard just notifying someone that will be in the area and, to do inspections. And I think it's, cost beneficial. Dues, fees, and subscriptions, we belong to the Essex County Assessors Association and the Massachusetts Association of Assessors. Those are important. That's for myself and all 3 board members for both organizations. They offer a lot of the training. A lot of the training that they offer are free webinars, and I take advantage of that as much as possible. In office supplies, we needed additional monitors and things of that nature. Could we trim that a little bit? We probably could take a deeper dive into that. But right now we're presenting a level funded budget, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
So you mentioned that, if I heard correctly, that the full-time assessor took another position in another town, so we're down one person, so to speak?
Yes, I am everything. I'm doing it all.
So you're the top line position there, for salaries and wages?
Yes, I am the interim assessor right now.
Oh, okay. All right. So the budget would go up if a new person came back?
No.
Or if we got another person?
I can clarify. So just something I was going to say at the end anyways, but, just for clarity on this budget, this was last year, this was a shared service similar to how we have set up with the permitting, Rich Maloney, who spoke earlier. So last year, or really currently this year, the intermunicipal agreement we're in is Hamilton is the lead, and they hire what is called a principal assessor, and this person was shared 50-50 between the 2 communities. The Board of Assessors and the Select Board have both voted to exit the agreement because it wasn't working as well as maybe it could have. So we have restructured the department. The net increase is 0. And the restructuring is Terry used to serve as the assistant assessor to the shared principal assessor. Terry is, although interim in title, is soon to be our principal assessor, full-time, that is not shared. She'll be Wenham only. And we created a part-time, 19-hour per week or less position that will be Terry's administrative assistant. So we've gone from a shared agreement to an office of 1.5. The net difference in cost is 0.
And providing better service to
Yeah,
Wenham
and better-
taxpayers.
Excellent point. And the service delivery will increase to the town of Wenham.
I took a crash course on being a FinCom member, the state provided, and they explained that there's a schedule of properties have to be looked at over in a certain schedule.
10 years.
Okay, where will the department being staffed as proposed allow us to keep up with that schedule?
Yes, so the administrative assistant there, we're actually looking for an assessing clerk / data collector, someone who would be able to help with cyclical inspections, sales inspections, building permit inspections.
To keep us up to date?
Correct,
Okay.
along with myself.
So, could you explain a little bit better about, what was or wasn't working in the previous arrangement, or what is it that this will be avoiding in terms of problems?
Yeah, so, I mean, in a nutshell, doing 2 communities is tough. So you're doing everything twice. So, the idea of, you share one principal assessor, so, one quote-unquote department head between the 2 committees, and between the 2 communities, at a high level, you realize, what could be true in some departments or industries. You don't realize any economies of scale. So the individual is doing essentially 2 full-time jobs twice, with only an allotment of half time for each community. So we felt that, as a result of Wenham being the non-lead, I guess, so we're not the lead community, so the individual is hired by Hamilton, and we pay for the services. We felt that Wenham was, not getting a fair amount of capacity, or we felt that for the money we were paying Hamilton, we could do it better ourselves. So in this situation, we have Terry, who, is extremely qualified, knowledgeable, has done a great job, will be able to dedicate the role that Todd filled part-time, full-time, so she'll step into his role, what that role should have been doing in a full-time capacity, but only spending 20 hours a week on it, and instead created a part-time assistant that will fill. So, if we're basically doing the job that the principal assessor should have been doing better, and the administrative and clerical work, we feel can get done in part-time, if that makes sense.
Yep. And is there any way that I know that you've been concerned in particular about the idea of achieving the assessment cycle, right?
Right.
And seeing that it's happening. Is there a metric that you would recommend that we be paying attention to? How well or we are in achieving the recommended metrics by the
As
state?
far as keeping up with cyclical inspections?
Right.
Yes, so, basically you run an inspection report out of the Patriot software, the last previous inspection, which I've done. I don't have the numbers right off the top of my head, but for next year, I believe there are over 200 properties that need, an immediate inspection. So working on that. In the next year or 2, there's over 300 that will be at their 10-year. You have to attempt to inspect every property in a 10-year period. Not every resident is going to let you into their home for a variety of reasons. So, we send out postcards, like I mentioned, first to notify people we're going to be on Spring Hill Farm Road, we're going to be on Main Street, we're going to be on Larch Row within the next few weeks. And then we follow up and we do knock on doors. And if no one's home, no one answers, we at least measure and take a new picture and observe from the outside what we can. You know, so it's basically just planning your time. How many inspections need to be done, how many can be done realistically in a week, and then, you know, charting it out that way.
Do you feel like 200 is achievable, 300 a year is achievable?
It has to be. You know, we may be a little bit behind from before when it was part-time staff, you know, part-time assessor, part-time clerical, which had retired, and then, you know, that position could not be filled. So they brought her back one day a week. You know, so yes, it will be done. I will make sure it's done.
Terry, maybe you can speak to this a little bit in terms of the inspections. So if you go to an inspection property and the folks, for whatever reason, you don't get into the home, and you take pictures and measure and whatever, you are allowed to make sort of assumptions
Yes.
around what the interior of the property might look like based on what the exterior looks like or whatever. So it does sort of, you know, even if folks don't let you in, you're able to make some adjustments, and then, you know, someone might come back and say, you know, want an abatement, you know, because they're, you know, you made assumptions about how the interior of the house looked, and if they go for an abatement, then we are actually allowed to get into the house. So, you know, it's an interesting sort of, the whole process is interesting, but, you know, I think your point of where, you know, having this extra person, the administrative assistant, be really more than that, have some ability to do some of these inspections on top of your full-time dedication to this now, you know, it makes the 200 a lot more achievable.
Right.
And we do have Patriot as well, which I don't know if they do any for us, but that is you know, if we were falling behind, you do have the ability to use a third party to do some of this work as well.
Yes, and probably, you know, maybe a data collector that I was more comfortable with, that, you know, that I felt like would do a good job, you know. I had a thought, but it just escaped me.
And I think when you're talking about metrics, maybe the most important metric to look at is when you get your third quarter tax bill every year, there's going to be a value on that, a valuation. That's what your tax, that's how much tax you pay. That's how, you know, the value kind of determines the proportion of the tax burden you're going to pick up for that year. And that value should be, you know, I usually give a general rule of thumb. It could be a little bit beyond this, but in general, you should be able to look at that value and say, you know, I could probably sell my house for, you know, plus or minus 10, maybe 15% of that value. If you're below that, right, you might think, well, I'm not going to say anything because I'm getting a good deal. But it's just as inaccurate as if you were above that, because you want to be, you know what I mean? Everyone wants to be paying fair, you know, fair and equitable. So, you know, if you're looking at something going from a year-over-year change where, you know, I'm just making numbers up, but you were assessed at $400,000, and you're like, yeah, right, I could get twice that for my house. Well, you're getting a better deal on taxes, I guess, if you look at it that way. But the reality of it is you probably should be closer to that $800,000 mark. So, and that's kind of the result of, it's kind of what happened in the past is we had some, you know, properties that were really low and they were brought to market. And, you know, it works both ways, both on the low end and the high end. We're bringing high end properties down just the same as we're bringing low properties up. Not high end as in like the value, but you know, statistically, properties that are being valued outside of, you know, where they should be, both on the high end and the low end.
And it's my concern that we don't get behind on the low end, you know, being refreshed.
So the assessment system is a computer model, and it's you know, there are statistical standards that have to be met by the state, and that's how we get certified every 5 years, by meeting those standards. Now, being a computer model, it's not perfect. So some, you know, properties are going to be underassessed just for the statistical, you know, piece of it alone, and some are going to be over. And the abatement process is in place to help those people who are over-assessed, truly over-assessed, to get a remedy. But everyone has to pay attention to their assessments and be logical about it, not look at, I don't want to pay, no one enjoys paying their tax bill. But if they look at that value and say, no, I really could not sell my house for this, then that's a good reason to come and apply for an abatement.
When did the state last perform their
Last year, fiscal '24,
we were up to snuff?
we were.
And
So
if
the
I
next one
may,
will be FY '29.
because I think there may be some confusion that your house is not assessed once every 10 years, but it's
no.
updated every year.
Correct.
No, I
Right.
understand that, and the state assesses the fact that we're up to date on our annual assessments as well?
They do a deep dive into our whole system every 5 years. So fiscal '29 will be the next one. Last year was our certification year.
So we passed on frequency, evaluation, and...
Yes, yes.
And the only other point I make is think about it like an audit, right? Every 5 years, they
Right.
don't say all 1,214 properties are assessed correctly. It's that the process works, or whatever.
Yeah, so, all right, so let's call that at the last question, just because we want to keep moving. I know Terry's available,
Thank you very much.
for any detailed questions at any time. All right, thanks, Terry. All right, let's do Rich. Let's just get.
That's good.
Buildings is also, will be under me, so.
Yeah, so we'll hit all ER. We'll do building and grounds, highway, snow and ice, and street lighting.
Yeah.
Buildings first?
Yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
usually the way we.
Okay.
Buildings 26 on your little.
So, is everybody ready? So this is pretty much a reflection of a level funded. I believe the only increase is that we're restoring the electric back into this budget. That's where that 2.52%. So this is the facilities director. This is the salary and wages is his position, as well as there's some funding in there for summer help if that's used. So that remains the same as last year. The clockwinder stipend is for just that, the person over at First Church. And then into his expenses, again, the electric is put back into this. This is to electricity and heat the garage at Iron Rail. There's a small office and a couple of bay garage that Mike, the facilities director, works out of. So that's where that, again, the only increase there. Building expense covers everything, all town-owned buildings, all issues that come up, all, anything within the building envelope. If there's any issues, Mike is there to respond, after hours as well. So that, that's the lion's share of his job, is to make sure that every component in all of these buildings is working every day. Contract services, that is the custodial services within the buildings. So that's the King Handyman is the people we use, and they've been with us for a few years, so that's been going well. The energy manager, it basically says that shared program with Hamilton that just more or less falls under this budget, but that's really, she's very active with the Green Communities group, so that's any projects done in Wenham, $5,000 of that for grant funding and things like that is done with that person. So again, level funded. The very large piece of what Mike does is respond to issues within these buildings. It was mentioned earlier that there was a HVAC issue at the fire station, emergency that needed to be replaced. Mike has been responding to that particular boiler for years, kind of just piecemealing, keeping it going. So hopefully that will, after that replacement, that'll be up and running and there won't be issues there, but that's where his time is consumed, where when there are issues, he comes in and fixes them. And does a great job.
And just for context, building expense, $40,000 for all the buildings across all the Wenham Town buildings. The boiler at the fire station was $32,000 this week. So like that budget is
And that is
gone.
That is a good point in the sense where major repairs like that, you'd normally capture under capital. I think that was deferred for a couple of years. So, again, Mike was doing a good job limping that along, but, then there was an emergency. So, to your point, that 40,000 is just to sort of keep everything running. It's not these major capital projects.
40, highway.
So again, this is another level funded for the most part. For salaries, it was mentioned, we are in contract negotiations with the union, so we are working towards, agreements. That contract is up June 30th, and it's the end of a 3-year cycle. So we're working hard to identify, areas where we're able to, come to agreements and where everything will fall within, operating budgets that we can actually afford. So to the operating side, really the only large, reduction that we've been discussing is down in the street maintenance, catch basin, rebuild, replace. That agreement or discussions that we've had, we've been very lucky in the sense where we've received additional grant funding the last few years. The largest, I would say, project that was completed was the Route 97 Topsfield Road. That was done with state funds. So that was actually through a grant program that the state helps towns with numbered previously owned state roads that the town now owns. But the positive there is that was a road that was in really bad shape. That's why it was done. But we would also have to respond to many potholes and issues on that road. So that road was in high deterioration, and we spent a lot of time fixing that road because it's a town-owned road. It was on my operating side. That getting done kind of keeps us off that road for hopefully years to come. So that was actually a very large benefit to the taxpayer because that project was done through state funds, through DOT's funding. And there has been other funding with the ARPA. So I've been able to sort of move that program along further, faster on a better trajectory curve. So we're in pretty good shape as far as responding to issues on roadways. But that's what that street maintenance budget is for, that type of work. Curbing, patchwork, all of the police details that are associated with that comes out of that funding. A lot of that work has to be done with police details. So that's where that pot is generated from. The catch basin rebuild and replace, that was newly added a few years ago to be more of a proactive program instead of a reactive program. We've done quite a bit of work on drainage issues that were known in town to get ahead of that stuff. So again, talking with Steve and Jeff and Joe, it's been agreed upon that we can, kind of become more of a reactive department in that one line item where we could still keep things moving along, identify issues that come up, take care of them. There's enough funding there to take care of them and keep moving along. So overall, level funded, but with a conscious decision to remove some funding out of those 2 line items and still be able to provide the services we've been doing for the last few years. That's really, the highlights I'd want to go over. If there's any questions, feel free.
Great. Thanks, Rich.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Snow and ice.
Oh, yeah, not going anywhere.
Snow and ice.
Oh,
Snow and ice is a quick one. That's more or less a level funded.
Street lighting.
So
Correction there.
that's street lighting. I mean, well, just snow and ice. So again, completely level funded. This budget is really based on how much weather we get each year. So, you know, it's not, we spend as much as we need to fight storms and keep the roads safe. Some years are better than others. So there's really no change there. And no recommended changes on my end.
So if you have a mild winter, you end up contributing to free cash?
Yeah,
Exactly.
yep, that goes back to.
Yeah, and it's the only budget you can overspend by law, essentially because you're trying to protect the weather. But the state also regulates, you can't, because you can overspend, you're not allowed to just, so if you have a year with very little snow and ice, you can't drop the budget way,
zero
way
fund it
down
next year.
and then lower your tax rate and then use this as sort of like a loophole.
Right.
So they're always going to have sort of a minimum, you always use what you had last year unless it would, even if you had a really low last year, you can't reduce it. The only time the state gave us some wiggle room was after 2015 when it snowed a foot a day for a month. All the towns said, like, we can't have a budget of, $2.4 million for snow removal. Like, we have to go back to a more normalized number. But yeah, this is, it's kind of it is what it is kind of budget.
And street lighting's level funded too?
No,
Oh.
it's bumped up. As you can see, I mean, we budgeted 18,000 in FY25. It hasn't been 18,000 since before FY23, so we're just trying to bring that a little bit more in line to sort of, to Bob's point earlier, trying to get utilities a little more under control.
And this is more or less for streetlights. If there's issues, my department, the DPW, does not respond to those, so we have a contractor come in and replace streetlights and repair things like that. So that's what that budget mostly consists of.
Do the highway employees end up staffing when we have a storm?
Oh, yes.
The snow removal?
Correct. Oh, yeah. That's so we.
Is that an overtime item for them, or?
If it's after, it's between the 7 to 3 and 3 o'clock, it's within.
During hours,
That's a normal straight time. And anything between 3 o'clock and 7 a.m. is time and a half.
Blizzard, do you have call firefighters,
Yep,
but
contractors. We have a few contractors that we keep, and they help us out on the larger storms. Yep, we have reached out to them this year already, and they're on board, so that's good.
Thanks, Rich.
Great. Thanks, Rich.
Thank you.
All right, we'll jump down to the library next.
Hello.
Hey, Kim,
For
how you
those-
doing?
For those that don't know me, I'm Kim Butler. I'm the director over at the library. I'm going to hope I can see that without my glasses. So in terms of our overall budget, my staff union contracts are set for fiscal '26, so those salaries are set. That's not a question mark. So the 2.24 increase is largely union staffing. Everyone on my staff is union with the exception of myself and our two shelvers, our high school pages that make minimum wage. So that is pretty cut and dry. If I flip over to our expenditures, for those who've been here before, you heard me say we have some mandated line items that we have to meet in order to qualify for our state aid certification. The first one is always our, what they call our materials expenditures. It can come from a couple of different line items. The biggest one obviously is books. So that's that small increase you see there. The next line in terms of subscriptions and periodicals, we have categorically reduced it over the years and will continue to do that. That's our magazines and newspaper subscriptions. As more of those go out of business and a lot of those go digital, we definitely will see less funding needed in those line items. I'd say the most that we spend is on our newspapers still. The New York Times is very expensive, but we have a lot of users that come in and still like the physical newspaper. They're at our doorstep at 9 o'clock every morning waiting for their newspaper. So we'll probably keep looking at that as the years go, and definitely that will be something that will continue to go down. Our technology line encompasses a bunch of things. It's primarily our membership to the Merrimack Valley Library Consortium. I'm part of the executive committee for that, and we did a deep dive into our membership rates because they hadn't been looked at in a long time. So we're actually seeing a little bit of a decrease in our membership because we were overpaying based on some of our smaller libraries that weren't paying their fair share. It also encompasses our e-content line that we get from the consortium. That's our, if anybody uses the Libby app, that's our Overdrive ebooks and e-audio resources. And then the last is sort of an other line, which encompasses all of our peripheries, whether it's a barcode scanner, a receipt printer, a scanner, a mouse, a keyboard, anything that needs replacing. It's some of our contracts in terms of our website subscription, our domain subscription for our website. It's our contract for our telephones, things like that fall under that sort of other line. And also in that, I forgot to mention, we're, with our capital and our ARPA requests, we are getting a key access control system installed and security cameras. There's a yearly fee now associated with that that's being absorbed into that technology line. Supply, just about, is level funded from past expenditures. If you look back at fiscal '23, that's everything from postage to paper to toner, all those things that go into running our building. Our conference and travel is level funded. Anything that we can't fund out of that line, we take out of our state aid funding. In order to sort of absorb the increase that we saw in the salaries, I did pull out the $1,200 that's in that program line. Most of our actual programs that happen at the library are funded by the Friends. That line is largely symbolic. As you can see, it's never increased in all the years I've been here. I usually use it to cover the cost of our movie licensing that we do. In order to publicly show a movie, you have to pay a service to do that, and that anything that falls across all age groups, adult, teen, and kids, I will pull out of that, so it's sort of equally distributed. And it was also the cost for our online subscription for our summer reading program that's run through an online service and an app. I will speak with the Friends about absorbing some of those costs and probably substituting some state aid money for the other parts of it.
Please continue the movies.
Yes, they've been huge.
It's really good.
Yeah, they've been hugely popular. And interestingly enough, we also get, so we run Friday morning movies, and also our children's department runs family movies. And on the Friday morning movies, which I run, we actually get a very high attendance from a couple of the group homes in the area. And I've heard from their managers and their chaperones that come with them how much the clients love coming. So that's been a really nice thing to hear, too. Our heat and utilities are level funded. Our water bill, strangely, was higher last year. So I added a couple $100 into that. We're billed from Hamilton, so that's, you have to ask Hamilton about that. So our water bill was a little bit higher. And then the small increase in building and grounds was for our contractual increase for our janitorial contract and also for our IT contract. Everything else there is level.
Bob has a question.
Yeah.
What are the metrics used for the MVLC allocation?
So it just changed. So it's now based on, I wish I had it in front of me. It takes into account the last 3 years average of your circulation. It takes into account the number of staff that you have. And I'm forgetting the last one, which is a failure because I was on the committee. I believe, oh shoot, what was the last one? I apologize, it's not coming to me.
The
but
change has been, what was it in the past?
It was based on population, it was based on circulation, it was based on, it didn't take staffing into account. And then there was a weird metric in there that allowed a lot of the small libraries to sort of stay level through the years, whereas the medium, which is us, and the large libraries were absorbing the cost of some of those smaller libraries, because the theory was that those smaller libraries come from smaller communities that can't fund them as well. So the burden was falling to communities like us, Hamilton and Wenham, to sort of subsidize, which became untenable, and it wasn't a true reflection of what was happening. So there are smaller towns presenting very different budgets to their committees this year, the Rowleys and the Boxfords of the world, but it's definitely a fairer system, I think.
All right.
Do we have an idea of what the attendance or usage numbers are per year? And of that, how many are children and families?
So the door count that we get doesn't tell us, obviously, who's coming in. We can sort of tell it from program numbers and from circulation numbers, but for fiscal '24, we had 73,609 people through the door. I can pull out my fancy table. We had 571 programs. That's across all age groups. We had 12,754 people attend a program, meaning just about everybody in the two towns would have attended a program at the library at some point last year. And then 205,724 physical items were checked out. That doesn't take into account our e-resources or our databases. But we'd have to, I do report to the state on the age groups of program attendance for different, for, I think it's birth to 6, and then it's 6 to 12, 12 to 18. They make, when I report, I have to break it down that way. I just don't have it in front of me. But.
With the camera usage, are they able to put a camera taking a look at who is going into the children's room? Because,
No.
So there isn't a way to do that?
We wouldn't want minors on camera.
Yeah,
That's
it's
why,
not
yeah.
I was more or less thinking, I think the usage of the children's rooms and the usage of the children's program is drastically underreported. That room is consistently, in my opinion, always used, and the remainder of the library is quite dense. So I'd like to know what those numbers are to be able to understand exactly, not necessarily who walks in the door or from a program perspective, but the amount of families that use the children's room, I don't necessarily think is reflected in the budget. So I would really like to know that number.
Yeah, we report it all. I can look at, like I said, the two things that would probably point to that would be, like we talked about, the program numbers and also the circulation numbers, because I can look at the types of items that are going out in terms of picture books or chapter books. So we can see that. And again, like you said, not everybody is going to check out when they leave, but they do come in and hang out there and use the space. So you're not getting that number, unfortunately, without actually putting a door counter right at the children's room entrance.
And there's no way to do that.
We could. The door counters themselves probably cost $500 to $1,000 to purchase, and then we'd have to have electricity and install them. But it's something we could look at if that was something that the board or my board of trustees felt was something to do. We could definitely do it.
Yeah, because the amount of programs that were cut for children, opposed to the number of usage, I do believe is really inconsistently reported on this. So to find out that there's a major flux of families that do use it, I'd like to then reflect that in the budget. So if there's a way that we could have that presented to the select board, that'd be great.
Sure. And the Friends probably, if I looked at what they spend, I do have the breakdown for what they spend on our children's programming, our adult programming. In our teen programming, it's probably about $10,000 a year is spent out of the Friends budget on children's programs. And then on top of that, our children's librarians great about applying for grants and cultural council grants on top of that. So there's probably even more that comes in that way. And they are wonderful about being resourceful and doing things at minimal cost as best they can.
Maybe I missed it, but the library is regional, right? Hamilton, Wenham. So is this our share that's reflected here in terms of the cost?
So what you see here is the total budget, and then there is a line item of revenue that's part of the local receipts that we get paid from Hamilton. Essentially, it's like most things, it's like a 2/3, 1/3 split.
Is that negotiated annually, or is that in a statutory?
That's in an agreement that was set up to form the joint library, and then each year we do a spreadsheet that takes all the expenses fully loaded. So like, we take people's salaries, their benefits, all those things. We allocate a portion of the cost of like finance, town administrator, legal, whatever, and then roughly 2/3 of that, goes over to Hamilton. So we bill them quarterly, sort of on a sort of preliminary basis, and then the fourth quarter of the fiscal year, we get, we sort of true it up with the actuals.
So roughly speaking, 2/3 of this is ultimately absorbed by Hamilton?
Yeah.
Yes.
Generally speaking, yeah.
And just for clarification, we've talked about a couple different shared programs today. Both of those, Hamilton served as the lead. In this case, Wenham is the lead. So we're all the hiring, we're the building maintenance, operations, labor, all that. So we manage all of that, and in return, Hamilton pays 2/3 to use the service.
I just wanted to point out one last thing. You referenced state aid a couple of times, just so people are aware. The state allocates library aid to communities. Our share of your state aid, I think, is about $15,000 a year or so, so I presume Hamilton's is probably a little larger, so all in, it's probably about $40,000-ish annually that it supplements this budget. So this budget is just the operating budget, and then as needed, you can access those funds for other, like you mentioned, potentially using the $1,200 of state aid, for the programs line there. That is money that, as we look at departments that we cut, or whatever, library is one where making cuts can put you to a level that you'd no longer be eligible for state aid. Now, at a high level, you might look and say, okay, well, I could cut $100,000 and I'd only lose $50,000 of revenue, so, maybe that's something I'm willing to do. I'm not advocating it, but the part of it you explained to us the other day that I didn't understand it as well was, not only would you potentially lose the state aid revenue, but you'd also lose the ability potentially, based on how you cut the budget, to share services with other libraries, like within the Merrimack Valley Library Consortium. So that, it's more than just dollars involved, because I know maybe not as much here, but in my library that's much smaller, that sharing the service is a huge component to how sort of robust and viable the library is. So I just, thought it was important people understand, sort of, not every budget has components that, cuts might have offsetting revenue changes or whatever, but this is one where you potentially lose a revenue stream, and you'd also potentially lose some functionality based on funding. And the fact that it's a shared service with Hamilton, you probably just have to be that much more, careful as you talk about, making these kind of adjustments.
Where does that show up in the numbers?
What's that?
The state...
So the state aid, it's one of the only pieces of state aid that what we see in our budget is called general state aid. There's a component carved out for every community, library state aid, that goes directly to libraries and set aside in what's called a special revenue fund that doesn't have to be used, every year. Kim doesn't have to spend that $40,000 down. It can be sort of, accrue to be used for, certain projects or different things, but you don't see it. That actually gets pulled out of our available local receipt or our available state aid.
I'd say most of our state aid goes towards technology. We own, or we have 28 to 30 computers between staff and public, and they need to be replaced pretty regularly, and that's nowhere in this budget.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Kim.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Grab water next. Water.
Eric Mansfield, Water Superintendent. So for this budget, the salaries at this point are level funded. That will obviously change slightly with contracts, with only a part-time employee that we use for admin and one other full-time employee besides myself. It won't be a big increase. Expenses are I have an increase of around $15,000, and that is because of utilities, chemical costs, and unlike some of the other departments that are funded by the general fund, where they were offset by the reserve account that the town hall had, mine have gone up, but I have to increase them because we are solely paid for by water rates. Since I did meet with Jeff and Steve, I had a meeting with my water commission last Wednesday. At that point, they voted to increase what we pay to our capital reserve account from $35,000 to $50,000. So that's an increase of $15,000 there, which I will get Jeff the updated spreadsheet. And that money goes towards future capital projects. We originally started contributing to it in 2017. At that point, we decided that, eventually we would start adding to that amount to help offset costs. And they've also asked me to, we're going to be looking at a slight rate increase to help pay for the offset to the difference in our budget. Because people are conserving more since 2021 when we put in the conservation rate, we need to look at increases to our base and the two smaller tiers that we have, so that we have more of a consistent money coming in to pay for that. And that's about it for water. If any questions?
What's the revenue?
Last year, I think it was around $630,000, and the year before was higher. Like I said, since we've enacted the conservation rate, we've actually seen a drop in the two higher tiers of bringing in money.
Yeah, 24, you're actually at a little over 600,000 in total, like with all leak charges and all kinds of other stuff. But yeah, just that Eric alluded to it, but we consider water, like all the other town departments, but at the same time, they don't go to your tax rate. Water is 100% supported by the water fees, the water rate that's charged. So making increases here will obviously impact people's pocketbooks because their water bill will go up. But when we're talking about the override and the tax rate and all those things, this is sort of separate from that conversation.
Will there be any consideration, Eric, to even more steeply hiking the conservation rates as a means of raising additional revenue, understanding that they've been effective in driving water conservation? So out of 1,240 residents that use water, less than 1% actually hit that conservation rate. Mm-hmm. So even raising it, we won't see a lot of revenue from that. Okay. And I mean, honestly, we've seen, we have seen people who are in that conservation rate drop out of it since we implemented it. So. Okay. Thank you.
Yep. I think last year when you were concerned about PFAS legislation coming through and requirements on that, and that there might be a material increase in testing or filtration or something. Can you describe like what's happened the past year on that topic?
Yeah, and I think it would probably be more of a different meeting, but so by 2029 we have to have some sort of PFAS removal in place. We've already last year we got some grant money from Ipswich Water and Mass DEP to look at what our options are. And basically, where we ended up was, we're gonna probably looking at spending up to $12 million to build a treatment plant for the removal of PFAS. One thing we're gonna have on, as a town meeting article, will be to transfer some of our water reserves that we have to begin design and testing and pilot testing of how we can treat the water. And that's basically, we're right in the beginning stages of coming up with what our plan is, and applying for no interest loans from the state, Clean Water Act money, and infrastructure money that was put aside from the Biden administration.
Yeah, like Eric said, this is sort of outside the budget discussion, but the whole, the PFAS and the water treatment plant, we talked a couple weeks ago, we're trying to coordinate a meeting that, will be separate, whether the water commission with Eric comes into a select board meeting and makes a more, pointed, presentation on, our preliminary planning and, where we're at now, where we see ourselves going, because it's certainly a pretty big discussion. So keep your, we'll be circulating, when that's set, we'll be circulating information to the boards to notify them.
And our discussions with the Mass DEP is, nobody's gonna be backing down from the PFAS requirements of removal. So, I mean, by 2029, we will have to have some sort of treatment in place.
Is it fiscal 2029, or is it?
Year 2029.
Okay.
And that's gonna be statewide, it's like every town can do this?
It's
or-
nationwide. The EPA is, and we have to follow, we have to be at least as, Massachusetts has to be at least as stringent as the EPA
So
guidelines, so.
conceivably, every town Massachusetts is gonna have to spend at least $10 million on.
We're in a kind of a different situation because we have no treatment plant now. A lot of towns and cities, they already have treatment plants, so they can do small upgrades to be able to treat the water. I mean, we have to basically start from the beginning.
All right. Thanks, Eric.
Look.
Town clerk?
Oh, yeah, town clerk, yeah.
Diane, we need town clerk.
So now you're in for it. It's the most exciting department. No, the other ones, whatever. Hi, everybody. It's Diane Bucco. Nice to see you all. There's basically a reduction, I guess, in my total budget line. What to say, what to say? I'll start with questions.
I guess I'd start by saying Diane did a really nice job working with her early on of creating a side spreadsheet that you don't see here that really walked through all of her costs and what rolled into each and every line item, which is why you're actually seeing nearly a 4.5% decrease in her expense budget because she's got a really good handle on each one of those things. So that was really helpful.
So they don't have this?
No, they have that, but the side spreadsheet that
Okay,
you worked
yep,
on, that,
yep.
it was much more, each and every thing that went into your supplies or your dog tags and that kind of thing.
And the other reductions we were able to make, where we were carrying some additional funds last year in anticipation of the transition from an elected town clerk to an appointed town clerk. So we knew there would be some overlap in the positions and additional costs associated with that. So you'll see that money that we budgeted last year was able to be removed this year now that we've transitioned to an appointed town clerk, who is Diane Bucco. And hopefully we, add some stability to the department. And I believe we will.
And most of the services and the requirements that I have are mandated by law, so it's hard to cut anything down, really. We just try to do everything as smoothly and efficiently as possible.
Great.
And so the only thing I will mention is that it should be a slower election year. except that now that our representative for 1A is appointed, will be appointed to the judgeship, we will have a special elections. So we'll have a primary and a election around the same time as our town election, so it'll be a little bit busier than was the original plan, but it's pretty exciting, so. That's Jerry Paracella, so that's just for 1A. That's it.
Thanks, Diane.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
See you later.
Okay, last but not least,
Last but not least. Should hope so.
we saved the best for last, I should say.
Kind of the population, the
We
old
saved the
folks.
best.
If 60 is old, I don't know. But my name is Jim Reynolds. Nice to see you all. Thank you for your time. Pretty much level funded here. I mean, expense line we've managed to stay pretty much the same for the last couple of years. I don't know what to say about that. Yeah, we managed pretty efficiently, I think, there. The salaries, most of our budget is made up of salaries, so, and I'm the highest line item on that. We're in a bit of a transition period, I would say, right now. Our administrative assistant passed away in early November or mid-November, and so we've been without that person, Kathy Tomasello, for about a month, and that's been challenging. But I've got 3 van drivers. We account for basically 7 hours a day for each one of them. I did get I applied for a grant for a new van, smaller vehicle through the Mass DOT, which we'll hopefully get, but it won't be till the fall of 2026, I think. So, and then, yeah, got a great, I really lucked out when it comes to hiring as far as my outreach person. She's been great, and I've actually even looked to, create a little more parity between the director and the outreach, because outreach is really critical, I think, to identifying people in need and so forth. But for the moment, we're good. But yeah, I think we're. I don't know what else to say. So if you have any questions, happy to answer them. How old is the van now? 2018 is when we got when I applied for the first one. So it's 6 years. It's got about 60,000 miles, 62,000 miles. And part of the rationale I was using for the grant was Hamilton has consistently asked for help because they're using CADA, and it doesn't really work very well for them. I would have preferred for them to apply for the grant and then share the services, but they weren't. They haven't been that interested in assuming the liability associated with running a van service, which I think is proven to be really helpful for those that are most in need.
Do we ever get requests from other towns to assist or engage in any kind of regional collaboration? I'm thinking of Danvers or any of those other towns that might have rising populations, even of like some of the migrant populations that have come to Peabody, Danvers, and those areas. Like, do we get those kinds of requests to assist, or more so just from Hamilton?
No, just from Hamilton.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we fall in the catchment area of the 9 communities under the senior care umbrella. So they're the Aging Services Access Point. And so actually I've recently taken the initiative to try and bring those 9, the 9 directors together, because senior care hasn't really been doing that. So I think, sharing information about each other's services and some of our challenges is something that we've been working on. But no, we don't get too much. Every city and town has a council on aging / senior center. Anyone is welcome to any one of them, and the work that we're doing to try and do more collaborating with Hamilton is seemingly made a significant impact, I think. We've got a 2-town newsletter at this point. We publish an e-publication every Monday before noon for both towns, which is more like a weekly, what's happening that week. But
Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Jim.
okay, thank you.
All right, so that's really it. I just want to just quickly, before closing out and let everyone go home, I just want to say you guys, I've been through a lot of budget cycles the last 15 or 20 years or whatever I've been doing this, and you really have a good group of folks that work for you here in Wenham. They approach every budget cycle, with creativity. They're willing, just particularly when we're asking to identify reductions, they approach the problem willingly, with the willingness to work. And, it's really great working with them. And Jeff here, who's our new finance director, has, really hit the ground running. He's really taken control of the budget, and that's been great. He brings, a level of experience and knowledge, particularly around how the accounts are structured in the back and where the revenue needs to go and how it comes in, and just all the nuts and bolts, and maybe even maybe even more so important is his ability to explain it like in layman's terms, so we kind of all understand what's going on in the background. So I just want to say you got a good team working here, and thank you for everybody sitting and hanging out this morning with us. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, if you just call both public both boards, please just adjourn before we shut down.
All right, so I'm looking for a motion to adjourn the FinCom meeting. It's 11:24. Looking for a motion, second. All right, and aye. Any against? None? All right, unanimous here.
Thank you, and thank you to the FinCom for joining us this morning. As Steve said, thank you to all the department heads, and I thank Steve, Joe, and Jeff for really some excellent work. Thank you. Gary?
One quick comment, too. I think, out to the public, too, we need to recognize that, at the COA and other places around town, that all our employees often go well beyond what their job descriptions are, both in activities and the time devoted to the town.
All right. On that note, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody.